morning. Wednesday, April 15th. Half the month is gone. April 15th. Oh, it's not tax day, it's February 15th. I'm way ahead of myself. Thank you. It is February 15th, 2023. And we are taking up S4, an act relating to reducing crimes of violence associated with juveniles, dangerous weapons. And this is a strike-all amendment, draft 2.1. And Eric Fitzpatrick is going to walk us through the amendment, and then we'll take comments from anyone. And committee members, feel free to ask questions of Eric if you don't understand something. So Eric, why don't we start with section 1? I believe the highlighted sections is what we're going to go through. Will represent the changes.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you, Secretary. This is Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel. Just getting my screen set up so that we can look at the version you mentioned, Senator Sears, which is version 2.1 of the proposed Senate Judiciary Committee strike-all amendment, S4. And it looks like some folks have paper copies, so you're okay with paper copies, and
Yep.
also look at the screens. That sound like a good way to do it.
It's also posted on the committee page.
Okay, thanks. So Senator Sears, is it, you want me to share the screen? Is that where?
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay. Moment to pull that on. All right. So, as was indicated, this is version 2.1 of the strike-all. Earlier, the committee had looked at the first version of a strike-all amendment, which was 1.1. So this one is from last evening. And so, as Senator Sears mentioned, it incorporates some changes that the committee has discussed, some changes that Senator Sears had asked to put in this draft, as well as some other proposals for the committee to think about and decide whether or not it's the direction you want to go. So as you said, Senator Sears, starting from the beginning, section 1.
Thank you.
This has to do with the delinquency proceedings provision that you may recall. The proposal here in the bill as introduced was that to essentially expand the Big 12 for all practical purposes. That's what it does. Remember, the general rule is that criminal offenses are filed against a juvenile in the criminal division only if it's a Big 12 offense to start. If it's not a Big 12 offense, then it has to start in the family division as a juvenile matter. So that's the general distinction. Juvenile, non-Big 12 offense goes to the family division. If it's a Big 12 offense against a minor, then it has to start in the criminal division as a criminal matter. So the proposal had been to add 3 offenses to that list of 12 that start the criminal. So starting there, page 2, you see the existing committee language was the 3 proposals A, B, and C. So these would be the 3 new Big 12 offenses, become Big 15 for all intents and purposes. There's no, the change is only in the first one. You see the 3 proposed additions are human trafficking, trafficking a regulated drug, that's B and C. And A, originally it was carrying a dangerous weapon while committing a felony in violation of this criminal statute that's cross-referenced there, 13 BSA 4005. And that is the way the criminal statute is written. It's carrying a dangerous weapon while committing a felony. But the committee had discussed that to target that more, more the types of offenses that would start the criminal division instead of family, it wouldn't just be all dangerous weapons that would start the family division, it would only be firearms. So that's what that change is now that you see. So it wouldn't be any dangerous weapon, it would only be if the young person, right now 18 and under, as of July 1st, it would be 19 and under because it raised the age. But as of right now, 18 and under is charged with that offense, carrying a firearm while committing a felony, would start the criminal division of the family division, subject to transfer, but that's where it started. So that's one change. The first point, backtracking a little bit to subdivision 2.
Before we leave.
Yeah, sorry.
One, I'm just checking, so my memory is that trafficking a regulated drug, the word traffic indicates more than just a lower level drug.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's, in fact, it's even higher than sale.
Yeah.
So possession, sale, trafficking, and all is triggered by the amounts.
Right.
The amounts of trafficking are substantial.
So a small-time person selling or caught with a small amount of drugs would not be coming under this. We would be looking at somebody who was under that age, but who was moving very large.
Substantial, large amounts.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, just the point, this was just a point of discussion, not a proposed change, but I think one of the things the committee had been discussing was whether or not to further, because you'll see the existing law, which is lines 10 to 15 on this page, and that's the existing language that applies to the Big 12 offenses, which starts where, it's all right there. And it applies, you'll see, lines 11 and 12, to someone who is 14 but not 22, so 14 to 21. So this new language for the new three offenses, lines 7 to 18, just track that same age range, right? It's the same that's in existing statute for the existing. So, but there has been some discussion in committee. Do we want to narrow that age range anymore? Maybe change that 14 to a higher range. Again, I don't think the committee had landed on anything and hadn't even necessarily decided that, but that's highlighted so that you can think about whether or not keep that age. That makes sense for now. All right, so now we're moving to and these two sections are kind of a unit, sections 2 and 3. These, actually, yeah. And these have to do with, remember, permitting, knowingly or recklessly permitting a criminal offense to go on in a dwelling or a building that someone owns or controls. There's an existing statute, that's section 2, that has to do with knowingly permitting the sale or dispensing of a regulated drug in a dwelling that you own. That's existing law. Remember, the bill originally proposed expanding the knowingly to recklessly. There had been some discussion about the penalty. I should say the fine. I think everyone had agreed that the 5-year felony was okay. But it's a question about whether $1,000 was enough of a fine. You'll see, I think last time the committee had come down on 15,000, so that's where that is now. So that's that change. Similar, we've gone over this language last time, but this is the idea that there's an opportunity for the landlord or the property owner to take some affirmative action so that they wouldn't be prosecuted under this criminal statute. So, they're indicating that they're taking some steps to try and address this criminal activity. Essentially, it's the idea. And you can see.
Eric is having trouble getting on. I don't.
Yeah. Shouldn't be on me yet.
Yes.
So the language exactly does that. It uses the wording address. You'll see. So it's not a violation if the property owner takes action to address the unlawful activity. And that's a general statement, and it specifies including, so you included a couple of possible things that the person could do to address it. They can start eviction proceedings, or they can report the unlawful activity to law. That's not an exclusive list. They could take other things that might address it as well, but that's what's identified. Section 3, very similar. Remember, originally, this provision, which also addresses allowing criminal activity to go on in a dwelling or building that you own or control. Remember previously, it wasn't just human trafficking, it was human trafficking or using a dangerous weapon in the commission of a felony. I think the committee decided to get rid of that. You only wanted to focus on the human trafficking piece here. And then, having done that, since it was only going to be a human trafficking piece, it makes sense to put this in the human trafficking chapter, since that's all that is affecting. So you'll see that's what's done here. That's why line 7 is highlighted, because the location of this change has been amended since the previous version. So now it's in chapter 60 of Title 13, the criminal code, the human trafficking chapter, and it adds a new criminal offense to the list of the existing criminal offenses under human trafficking. This one knowingly or recklessly permitting human trafficking in the dwelling. So again, just track the same language you were just looking at with respect to sale of drugs in a dwelling, but different criminal offense in this case, human trafficking. The same criminal fine, line 17, went from 1,000 to 15,000. Uses the same language that we just looked at in terms of allowing the property owner to take some affirmative action to avoid a criminal charge. Something to address it, including reporting to law enforcement for initiating eviction proceedings. So those are the changes there. The next provision, moving on to section 4 now, has to do with defacing a firearm serial number. Remember, this is based on federal law. It's been on the books for quite some time. The new language there you'll see has to do with, in case anyone doesn't still have it, I just want to pass out this piece regarding the bail statute, which will help us track why that language says what it says on subsection D. Everybody have it in front of them?
Mhm.
So this has to do with the issue of defining certain criminal offenses in the bill as violent offenses for purposes of the bail statute. So if you look at the bail statute for a moment, this is specific statutory language about when a person can be denied bail. So if you look at the different elements of what has to be shown, a person that is charged with an offense that is a felony, an element of which involves an act of violence against another person, may, it's crucial there, may, not shall, may be held without bail. And then see there's some additional findings there that the court's gonna have to make. May be held without bail when, 1, the evidence of guilt is great. So that's number 1. Number 2, the court finds, based on clear and convincing evidence, that the person's release poses a substantial threat of physical violence to any person. And, so you've got another finding there, number 3, no condition or combination of conditions of release will usually prevent physical violence. So there's 3, those are separate things the court has to find. So the provision that you're looking at here in section 4 and elsewhere doesn't have to do with any of those other findings the court has to make. It only has to do with that very first thing, an element of which involves an act of violence against another person. So if you look at the language, for example, line 16 to 18 now on draft 2.1, specifically referencing this offense. Conduct constituting the offense of defacing the firearm serial number shall be considered a violent act for the purposes of determining whether a person is eligible for bail under section 7553, which is what I just passed out. So you see, what that does is it only addresses the very first piece of that long list of things the court has to find. The court's still going to have to make all those findings. So this doesn't say the person's eligible for bail or not. It just says, for purposes of that very first piece, the person has to be charged with a felony, an element of which involves an act of violence against another person. This will be needed to satisfy that. It will be a felony. It is involves an act of violence. Pardon me?
Consider an act of violence,
Exactly.
but the court still got discretion.
Absolutely. It's still a may, court may be held without bail, and the court, it doesn't relieve the court of having to make those other findings before it can even exercise the discretion.
That was actually the first bill I worked on in this committee in 1993.
Oh, is that right?
It was in response to the constitutional amendment.
Right.
It was passed in 1992. And the Supreme Court had interpreted, the Vermont Supreme Court had interpreted it to mean they couldn't hold somebody without bail, as I recall.
Yeah, that's exactly
There
right.
was quite an argument between John Bloomer's father and John and the court, not Genesis of this legislation.
Right.
I can't
Yes.
remember who the court was at the time, but I can remember Bloomer being furious.
Right. Yeah, that's, so this statute was added, as you mentioned, statute, that's why it's got that little A in the title, 7553A. So there was a 77553, you must have added this piece in response to the court decision to clarify what you meant. So that's why, and I think there was some concern from some of the witnesses about making sure that that's all that this statute did. This proposed language here wasn't purporting to say that, this means that a
It's
person.
not automatic.
Exactly, right.
Okay. We'll continue to walk through, and Eric has arrived, but we'll, hopefully she's got some time. If not, I'm happy to hear from her. We can stop the walkthrough at section 6.
I have time. I have time, Senator.
Okay, so why don't we continue the walkthrough?
Sure. So moving on to section 5, this is another piece that's based on a federal statute. This one passed very recently in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act last year, criminalizing straw purchasing of firearms. Again, a similar change to this section, clarifying the language on the, because this also includes lines 13 to 15. A provision that says that the violation of this criminal provision is also considered a violent act for purposes of eligibility for bail.
Eric, is it, so I'd still like to remove the demand part of section A on line 2, unless there's committee discussion about that. Are we able to do that?
Of course, yeah.
Awesome.
Where is this?
Page 5, line 2. The
Oh, right.
demanding somebody else to straw man her.
I have my it's actually to make the same request. I do know that this mirrors federal law, but it doesn't mean they got it right, and they just worry in situations of domestic violence or situations that demand fees may hold someone accountable who actually didn't really have the wherewithal to say no.
Yeah, very good policy decision for you, so whatever the committee's pleasure is, certainly.
I think that makes sense.
Here.
Okay, yours?
Fine by me.
All right, sounds good. So next up, we'll take out demand, thank you. Also, just to note the great efforts that Chris Bradley and myself undertook to try and track down what some of these federal fines were, just so we could have some. There appears to be a mystery as to why it is they're unable to be located, but they're not in the statute. They're sort of general fines for the whole federal criminal code that are cross-referenced. Maybe they were deleted at some point. We don't know, but
Deleted at what level? Like,
within these specifics, but in federal law, the criminal penalties. I mean, the imprisonment is there, but I couldn't find it fines anyway.
but if they're deleted, are they law?
Good question.
Fine.
And I don't know that they're deleted. I'm speculating as to why they aren't there. Because we think they were, I thought they were there at one point. Anyway, so that doesn't provide us great comparison evidence. I'm afraid.
Did we have a conversation about, I know we reduced or changed some of the fines previously, but did we have a conversation about the $100,000 fine in both the defacing and the straw man purchase section? Is that something that as a committee we decided we wanted to keep, or is that still?
I think we were looking for the federal fine, the federal fine.
It was a conversation point, but I don't think we made a decision.
Yeah, I think my comment in that brief discussion before we said we would just put the fines was that I thought I could see a difference between knowingly or recklessly permitting, that third party thing, having a lower fine than these, which are direct the person committing the offense themselves. So for me, it made sense that it was higher, whether it was $100,000, I wasn't.
Well, that was the reason that they were searching for the.
Right. Yeah,
We were gonna match the federal, but if we can't find out what the federal is.
Right.
yeah, I mean, and I certainly, I think I agree with you, Senator Bruce, that there is a more deliberate action here and higher makes sense. $100,000 seems really high.
Well, it's up to, right?
But if you're.
Right.
You're the usual amounts of money that we see is in the $20,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 range. That actual cash on hand. There are some.
And I think that was one of the questions I had asked is sort of what is our Vermont range of fines? Like, would this be higher than a murder, but like, well, I guess if you committed a murder, you're probably not getting jail, but.
Right. No, it's the fine for, what's the fine for human trafficking or, Derek, what's the fine for human trafficking?
Human trafficking, I did look up, and that is, I looked up, drug trafficking is $1 million actually. Federal drug sale, the federal.
Oh, that's federal drug?
No,
trafficking? Oh, that's Vermont. Okay.
Yeah. Now, the human trafficking, actually, that might have been $1 million. But, let me double check this. It's like 500,000 for human trafficking. Yep.
That's
maximum.
interesting, that's the,
Under federal law, what is the maximum fine for straw purchases of firearms?
That's what we were unable to locate.
I
think he
believe
has to
Senator
see.
Sears is asking Siri.
Current law, current law
Nothing
is
personal.
called for a fine of up to $250,000 and a prison term of up to 10 years in prison. In addition, a kingpin clause included in the legislation makes it unlawful for any person affecting interstate commerce to have straw purchases of firearms to engage in a gun trafficking enterprise. So I would guess it's 250,000 according to Google.
Which, you know, if you're, it's up to, but if the person being charged obviously has access to millions of dollars, that's clearly what they're getting at with those
So
funds.
I'm, if you want to reduce it to 50,000, I did the 250,000. Trying to create a Vermont law, and I would agree that we should be higher than what we've done on the landowner, because that's not, I agree with your philosophy. I would, be amenable to 50,000. It's a maximum, and it just gives the court the flexibility.
Yeah, I'm fine with either. After hearing about the other ranges, it's fine with either.
I do think it is
Eric,
interesting.
instead of searching, you just go ask Google.
Yeah, evidently. Taking humans out of the equation.
Fortunately.
Right.
Automation of your.
I know, exactly. And now the AI supposedly can write very well too. That's the part I'm gonna hold on to. So 50,000, did I hear?
Yeah.
For sections 4 and 5?
Yeah.
Yep. Anything more on the straw purchases or the
No.
serial numbers? All right, so that brings us to section 6, which I don't think there were any changes to this one.
I have a question about
Yeah.
section 6. On page 6, line 7, didn't we change all the language around carrying a dangerous weapon, carrying a firearm?
Yes.
Yes, good catch, thank you.
And I continue to have concern around not narrowing the felony language, just again, felony property crimes to me should not, they're arbitrarily set at a dollar amount, and to me that should not rise to the level being considered a violent crime, regardless of whether or not you happen to have a firearm on you. I think I brought this up last time, we have stalking, that is a misdemeanor, and that wouldn't count. And then here we've got, kid comes out of the woods and throws a brick through a window for whatever reason, and that window happens to be a very expensive window, now it's a felony, how would they know this? So I think there's some narrowing here for me. And I don't know exactly how to narrow it, but I think this doesn't capture some things that maybe it should, and captures some things that it probably shouldn't.
Well, the easiest way to do that was committing a listed crime, which is, I don't know, 32 crimes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
They're all crimes of violence. And then you add in, I don't know why, LL with child.
Well, I think if you're doing that while carrying a firearm, that should be considered violence.
Well, for some reason, it's not a listed crime.
Oh,
So it would be those 26, 27, I don't know how many listed crimes there are, we keep adding to the list.
I mean, I'm also happy to put in language about like excluding property crime.
Well, the problem there is you would be excluding breaking into an
Fair.
occupied dwelling, which is a big 12 offense, because it's likely that somebody's there. But Eric, I think that's the intent here, is while they're committing, we could just add the big 12 to the listed offense.
Instead of any felony.
Huh?
Instead of any felony. Because right now it's carrying a firearm while committing a felony. And remember also, this isn't changing the underlying crime, right?
Drug trafficking.
This is only about whether or not someone's prohibited.
We've already covered drug trafficking, right? In other sections.
Oh, maybe this is not the section.
Covered it in what sense?
Well, if somebody's drug trafficking, instead of,
That's a prohibitor for, yes, possessing the fire. Because I remember this section is not anything to do with the underlying offenses at all. This is just adding a few.
I'm trying to understand which offenses we want to make where you could consider it a violation of section 405, 4005.
Right.
And I think I'm in the wrong section. I think the section I'm actually wanting to have this conversation around, I mean, I'm happy to have it both places, is the next section where it says carrying a firearm while committing a felony in violation of this section shall be considered a violent act for the purposes of burning. That, I think that's actually where I want to be having this conversation. So I'm a section ahead in my brain.
Okay.
So
Just have a quick question
Go ahead,
here. So Senator Booth just mentioned that why would we not have carrying a dangerous firearm while committing a violent felony in, because we're using the violent portion and everything else, is what I'm saying here. That would probably take care of the broken window part. Or say passing bad checks in excess of whatever. I mean, if it's a violent felony versus just a thought.
Does breaking and entering into an occupied dwelling count as a violent?
Yeah.
Okay, because that's what I'm trying to sort of get rid of, is the arbitrary crimes that are just.
I don't think it's not
violent.
defined in statute in a way that makes it easy. The reference you're talking about is language that's in the bail statute, a felony that includes an act of violence. But, that's not a definition. That's something that has been developed in the courts over time.
Need to either reference listed crimes,
That's one way to do it.
and that's the simplest way to do it. It's recognized by everybody.
Is stalking a listed crime?
Yes.
Thank you.
But again, I want to make sure that we're talking about the place where you want to make this change. So this statute this section is only about who can't possess a firearm, this whole section. And all it does is it adds to the current, what's known as prohibitors, people who are prohibited from possessing, which we have in Vermont law. And as does every other state and the feds. It adds a few things to that list to true up Vermont's prohibitor statute with the federal statute. So those folks would already be prohibited by federal law because federal law prohibits any felony. It doesn't matter whether it's violent or not. So this is just making it, so it's still under inclusive with respect to the federal law. Just pointing out that where you want to, if you want to talk about what this underlying substantive offense.
We want to, I think the goal, at least the goal of the bill was to narrow federal law in terms of who can possess it and can't.
That's all that's going on in this
So
section.
I would leave that.
I'm fine with that. I do have a question though. So has been charged with that they would, in the process of going through the criminal justice system, they would not be able to carry a firearm if they are then found not guilty. Does that go away? Because the way this reads to me is if they've ever been charged with that, now they can never be like, does what I'm asking make sense?
Yeah, it's a good point, because it's a parallel to the federal statute that says that someone's been indicted, same idea. In other words, they haven't been convicted of anything yet. But it's a good point as to what the consequences after, let's say, for example, someone is acquitted or perhaps the charges are dropped or something like that. So I think that the intent is while charges are pending,
You could say he's currently charged with it.
something like that, exactly. Yep. So let me check on, just to compare to the federal concept there, but I see what you're getting at, and that's a good point, so we'll follow up on that. Thank you. Anything more on this section?
No.
So now we're getting to the underlying effects that we were just talking about, section 7, which is this. So the existing language you'll see in line 20 is, and although the word firearm isn't in the title of the statute, it's in the firearms chapter. This is, in this particular case, refers to dangerous weapon. So while committing a crime is the way it currently reads, the proposal is to change it to felony, right? So it's not, for example, a misdemeanor. And the substantive language is there on the top of line 7, lines 1 through 4. Carry a dangerous or deadly weapon openly or concealed while committing a felony. It's a 5-year felony and a $500 fine.
Should that change to firearm? Is this also a space where we made the decision
Current
previously? Oh, this is current law.
Yes,
Okay,
1
thank
through
you.
4. Yeah. And then I think Senator Bahowski, the change to firearm is on line 6.
Yes, I see it.
So that it wouldn't be just any offense of carrying a dangerous weapon, it would have to be a firearm.
Mhm.
That it would constitute a crime of violence for purposes of the bail statute. Same parallel structure we've been looking at earlier.
This is where you could narrow it to
Listed crimes.
by
Yeah.
using listed crimes in L1L with a child. If that's what the committee wants to do. It's who we're trying to get.
All I'm trying to get out is those arbitrary dollar amount felonies.
Would that cover the person in the apartment who's and essentially being held hostage? Eric?
Like an unlawful restraint kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're not
So I definitely want that
physically
covered.
being held hostage, but it's clear that if they leave the apartment, the guns are on the coffee table.
So they've been holding someone against their will in an apartment and they have a firearm. I think that's kidnapping or unlawful restraint, so I believe those are both listed crimes.
You do actually have kidnapping cases in Bennington on that, of that nature.
But I want to double check that, because we do, we can either do it now, or I could get the listed crime list and circulate it to the committee either way.
Why
just so you
don't
can-
we research, I want to make sure that, that's covered.
Sure,
Yeah, we have some, you know, when people don't pay their drug bills. I think somebody in here mentioned that they don't go to the police and say, Joe didn't pay me for my cocaine. That's where a lot of this happens, and where this, people are held, there was a kidnapping in Bennington where they took the guy's girlfriend to Springfield, Mass, until he agreed to pay the drug bill. I just want to make sure that, and I know there's firearms involved, I want to make sure we're not missing that type of behavior.
I have a question, and certainly Eric told me that this would be too difficult, but what if rather than limiting in this way, saying it's listed crimes plus these others, we instead said it is a felony except a felony that is is only a felony due to monetary amount?
a monetary amount doesn't actually make something a felony.
Well, so
It's
my,
only the net.
oh, it's the fine, that, okay, well, but what I mean is, so there are property crimes and passing bad check crimes that can be misdemeanors or felonies, but it's that monetary amount that shifts it from a misdemeanor or a felony.
Right,
That's what I'm trying to exclude. So what if we put language in there saying that it, while committing a felony, except those felonies that only become felonies due to the monetary amount involved?
right.
That way we sort of exclude but we're not, because here's my concern, if we start making lists, we're gonna miss something. We're gonna come back and be like, oh, that should have been on the list. Whereas if we just exclude the things I'm talking about, we get rid of what I'm worried about without accidentally forgetting to include something that should be there. Is that, maybe it's too cumbersome to do in the language, but that feels to me like it sort of gets at my concern without maybe forgetting to include something that should be included.
I don't know which is.
I think it's a technical matter, it's draft.
Okay,
That's kind of what the question is, so policy wise, whatever people, direction you want to take.
Policy wise, I think we're just don't want to make a felony out of something that became a felony offense because of the value of the window or the
Right.
value of the
Right.
item shoplifted.
but I feel like to answer your concern that there might be some of these things that wouldn't be included by using
Yeah.
listed crimes, this way we make sure we include all those, but not what we don't want.
Right.
So that's sort of what I'm proposing, is we have language that says not these things, rather than language that says yes, these things.
You want to run to section 8? Or do you want- We don't have the language from Marshall in here, right?
It's in a separate, I can pull it up, but it's not, it's in a
Not
separate
here, because
document.
that's what Eric and
Right.
others are gonna. It also answers some of the governor's questions on some of the other crimes, right? We haven't gone through that yet,
Correct,
but I thought we had a section on that.
it's right, I can easily pull it up, it's just an, I think Peggy posted it, it's just in a different document. So, you want to go there next, Senator Sears?
Well,
Is
I
that
wanted to
subject?
Make sure Erica wasn't on forever here. Although the changes to the firearms sale in section 8, pretty simple.
Quick question about section 8 is, people who are under 21 currently who possess these firearms, would they be grandfathered into this?
It changes it to purchasing,
Right,
so there is no grandfather.
Right, so,
possession is not illegal. But
right,
transfer, under existing law, it's sale. No, you can't sell a firearm to someone under 21.
right, so I guess my question though is just, people who are under 21 right now, who
Yeah.
are in possession of these firearms, they're not going to fall into this category or have any issues?
Correct.
Thank
Yeah, exactly.
Could you explain, I understand the sell a firearm.
Yep.
Could you just get into or transfer a semi-automatic assault weapon?
Yes.
Just explain that one to me.
So then there's a distinction between selling and transfer. And that's exists in current law as well. For example, sometimes sales would prohibit, sometimes transfer. For example, the background check requirement kicks in with any transfer, federal firearms background check. Transfer is more inclusive. Sale is actually, exchange of the item for, in legal terms, we call that consideration, but think of it as money, something that you're buying the firearm for. Whereas transfer is to require that exchange, could be a gift, could be a loaning someone the firearm, could be any type of transfer from one person to another, not limited to a sale. So it's more broad, it's more inclusive.
Excluding family members or
In this case, no.
in this case, no. So my 20-year-old son has, for instance, if I had a semi-automatic pistol and I wanted to give that to for his birthday, I can't do that.
Correct. That's the way I read it.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, if I could just explain the change here. So you remember in the language we had, it talked about prohibiting semi-automatic possession for people under 21. So if you go back to S55, the bill the governor signed on the State House steps, it said that under 21, you couldn't purchase a firearm, but you had these carve-outs. So if you took a hunter safety course, if you were a member of law enforcement, et cetera. And one of those was that your family could gift you a weapon or transfer a weapon to you. So what this does is it removes the carve-outs, two of them, not the law enforcement or if you're in the military, but transfer by family members or also the hunter safety course piece just for semi-automatic weapons. So the intent was, under the old language, we would have criminalized people under 21 who possess the weapon now. And that wasn't the intent. And there was no buyback program or anything like that. So the change here is only going forward. So if somebody's under 21 and they have a semi-automatic now, this doesn't affect them. But going forward, you wouldn't be able to legally have a semi-automatic weapon by virtue of a hunter safety course or the fact that your parents gave it to you. So it will, theoretically, it would stop a very small number of purchases and transfers of these kind of weapons to this age people, but a significant enough number to do it in statute.
I understand it'll stop a significant small number of individuals who are under the age of 21 who will attain 21, 22, but it still will affect those constant 19, 21-year-olds or 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who are still coming into the, it still prevents anyone from gifting them a fire.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's probably a place where we might diverge on the committee, but
Look at it as a grandfathering piece. It sort of lists a little bit compared to what you had before criminalized possession. So that if you possessed it now, it would be illegal. And whereas this, in a sense, is a grandfathering piece, because if you possess it currently, when the bill is passed, then you wouldn't be prohibited. You wouldn't have to give it up. You wouldn't be criminally liable for that. But no transfers would be permitted in the future.
So it's a very narrow window
Is this similar to the federal statute regarding pistols? Under 21,
I think
or handguns, I should call them.
Senator, you have to leave for 5-10 minutes.
Okay.
I'll double check. The federal law does prohibit under 21. I can't remember if it's possession or
I
sale.
think it's purchase or sale.
Yeah, I think it is purchase. Right. So in other words, not possession.
Yes. Senator.
So, Eric, The transfer, you mentioned loaning, so would this section prevent someone under 21 from using their parents' firearm while hunting?
It's an interesting question. I would say that in all likelihood, from a legal perspective, is a temporary use the same thing as a transfer of the firearm? You know, I would lean toward, I'm not gonna pretend to think that I would know what every judge would say in that situation, because I think that there is an interesting point there, but I would view it as not a transfer in that situation, well, it could be viewed differently.
What makes a semi-automatic an assault weapon? What is the distinction? I think that's what I need to better understand.
But the way I read this, it's they shall not sell a firearm or transfer it, like, it's not just semi-automatic, it's a firearm, period.
No, it's
Oh,
just,
okay.
just the semi-automatic.
Okay.
The transfer only applies
So
to that.
Okay.
on line 12 says, or transfer, so not sell a firearm or transfer a semi-automatic assault weapon.
Right.
I have a pistol that has a magazine, and I think it's 10. What, is that a semi-automatic assault weapon?
It depends on the criteria.
Well, that's what I don't understand, is what makes this, what makes a semi, when I think of an assault weapon, I'm looking at the AK-15 or whatever it is. You know, the rapid fire.
I don't know if I should speak, Senator.
Well, you could, I guess, but I don't know what a semi-automatic assault weapon is.
Oh.
Under
just so
17
you
and
know.
18 is the definitions.
Yeah, and if you're speaking specifically about the pistol, that's on page 9, starts on line 11. So if you mentioned that it has a detachable magazine center series, that's one criteria, yes, and then it has to have at least one of the following features.
Oh, Erica has her hand raised, maybe. Erica?
Yeah, this could be a long section.
Sorry, I just wanted to, I was thinking about what Senator Vyhovsky's concerns were with, when we were back a section on the unlawful mischief felony. I think the simplest way to address that is just to exclude unlawful mischief felony.
Unlawful mischief.
I mean, I'm not sure what Eric thinks about that, but it still allows a 7553A for carrying a gun during a felony, but it would not allow it with unlawful mischief felonies. So that's any unlawful mischief over $1,000. I think that addresses both ways.
I'm concerned about.
I just think that addresses what Senator Sears is concerned with the Bennington cases, as well as what Senator Vyhovsky mentioned.
I don't know if that does capture everything I'm
Well,
concerned about.
So, Eric, if you can research that.
Yeah, it's just, that felony's only created by the dollar amount. So that's why I thought.
On unlawful mischief.
Right, but would that capture passing bad checks over a certain dollar amount? Would that capture, like, that's where I don't know.
Yeah, those aren't
Captures
crimes.
everything.
Those aren't 7553A crimes anyway. So,
Senator,
I just wanted to make a note regarding going back to the transfer from one family member to another family member. You know, I was thinking along the same lines as what you were thinking, Senator Norris, but I also know that a lot of the concern also rises for this sort of loophole involving domestic violence where, you know, firearms are removed and given to another family member, but there's still this this threat where the person accused of domestic assault can just get that firearm from that other family member after they've been charged. So I think it might be worthwhile just to get a quick comment from the network if they have an opinion on it, because I know it's something it is something they've talked about in the past, just to get more clarity on that section. That's all.
okay, why don't we skip this section until Senator Baruch gets back? I see there is a definition of It's all the. On line 17 on page 8 starts then. Okay, let's go to, the Agency of Human Services. Oh, we go right to section 9, Eric, there's no changes there, right?
Right, that's the provision also based on the Safer Communities Act that Congress passed this year that allows.
Oh, Senator Bruce is back. But anyway,
Sorry.
section. I know that in section 11, the Agency of Human Services had a couple of minor changes there. I don't know when they're to that. They sent them to us. And then,
Did you say they're sending some changes, Senator?
yeah, on the grant program.
Okay.
Can I ask, did it involve, the ACLU had suggested removing the piece where it had to be due to an uptick in drug activity?
I don't know, I haven't seen that.
Okay.
But we'll go back. I think we could wait on that section until we get the changes from.
Okay.
So we're gonna wait on 10 and 11.
Okay. Section 12.
Yeah, so this is the raise the age piece. Remember that the administration proposal had been to defer the implementation of raise the age by 2 years until 2025. The committee had been discussing possibly 1 year, possibly less. But for purposes of discussion, Senator Sears wanted to include some language, at least do it for 1 year to start with. If 1 year deferral doesn't mean you have to do that, but it's just to think about. And both sections 12 and 13, lines 12 through 21, all, although it's very technical language, as you can tell, we're looking at it. The import of it is that it delays raise the age by 1 year.
Thank you. And then we've got section 14, which is
Right, it's also related to,
that by requirement.
yeah, 2 different status reports, September and December, from DCF to Joint Legislative Justice Oversight and the Judiciary Committees describing the progress made toward implementing the requirement that raise the age take effect on July 1st, 2024. So ideally, the existence of the language will require some reporting to the legislature to confirm that the new age implementation date is being completed.
More notes? Thank you.
We have got
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Reading my.
No worries.
Slide.
Yes, I've got a stack of them myself. I'm sure it will come as no surprise that I have concerns about delaying this again. And if we are going to delay, would suggest 6 months rather than a year. I feel like we're just kind of kicking this can. You know, they've asked us to delay it, we did, now we're coming up on that date, we want to delay it again. How many times are we just going to keep delaying it? Like, and I appreciate the report, but I feel like in September, getting a report on where we're at, in December, we should have a report on like, what's the plan? Like, this is happening January 1st.
It's July 1st.
Right, no, I'm suggesting we change it to January 1st.
Right.
Well, and I would agree. My read on the administration is they no longer want this policy to happen, and that they will come in next year and ask for another delay. So that's as may be. I think there are some reasons to delay it. You know, reasons that we had last year as well. But if we did delay it, because for me, this would be the end of the delay. So I don't know what I think about 6 months as opposed to a year, but I definitely think that the administration is opposing this by delay, I guess. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Well, I think it might make sense to do 12 months, but I understand the point. I'm wondering if having it connected, having it delay until March 31st while the legislature's in session might provide for more input of the legislature if they're not prepared. In other words, we're not here, if we give them 12 months, we're not here on July 1st, 2024, it's an election year.
Yeah.
If we give them 6 months, which I don't think is enough time, we're not here on, now we'll be here January 1st, but we'd be paying attention to a bunch of other stuff.
That makes sense.
It gives committees time to hear theory.
My concern with March 31st though is it's after crossover, so what would we actually have the ability to enact any type of policy? What if it was March 1st?
You could, but I mean, we could put things in the budget.
There's always,
Yeah, so we,
there's always the miscellaneous judiciary proceedings bill.
and,
It
and
starts in the Senate, I think. It starts in the House next year.
and also it is possible for leadership to agree on an exemption to cross over if something's important. So I think there are 2 or 3 ways we could do it. Is it, I would be fine with either March 1st or March 31st.
I think March 31st. But yeah, their plan needs to be effective. Okay, so why don't we, Eric, can you pull up the,
I don't know, I'm having some technical difficulties here.
I want to make clear to everybody, if Eric is going to speak, I think is ready to speak on it, but this is a very, very rough draft of the ping pong.
Is this section 13?
It's not a section in the bill, it's a proposed, the concept, you remember the
This is what Marshall and Eric will work on.
right, and it addresses, as Senator Sears was saying, the ping pong, and what that often refers to is the way that youthful offender cases in particular can play out, which is that in order to initiate a youthful offender proceeding, the general way to do it is that it transfers down from the criminal division. So that, in other words, the proceeding is in the criminal division. Remember, those are Big 12 proceedings generally, right? And another way that they can start, if they don't transfer down from the criminal division, there has to be what's known as a direct file. So in other words, the state's attorney could direct file a case, a youthful offender case in the family division, but it has to be a Big 12 case. So let's say there's a so that shows you how the Big 12 case works. If it's a non-Big 12 case, then that starts in the family division. Remember, they have to start there. So if they're going to get to be a youthful offender case, it has to go up because it can't be direct filed as a youthful offender, because remember, that only applies to Big 12. So if that's going to get to the family division as a youthful offender, it's got to go up to the criminal division first and then back down to the family division for youthful offender treatment. See that? That's the ping pong.
Yeah.
A lot of time involved. So I think the idea, as you were saying, Senator Sears, was that they were going to work on, Erica and Marshall were going to work on some ways to try and address that. And that's the proposal here, is one way to try and address it. In a nutshell, I think what it does is the way that it proposes to address it, I'm trying to pull it here, is that, right now, there's a provision in law there's a couple provisions that permit a non-Big 12 case. So it has to be filed in a family division, right? So it's a non-Big 12 case. There's a provision that allows for transfer of that case to the criminal division. So if the state's attorney, for example, feels that it's a case that even though it's a non-Big 12, it should be treated as an adult in the criminal division. There's a proceeding that allows transfer and there has to be a hearing. Okay, so I think the proposal that Marshall's making is, okay, let's expand that hearing a little bit and permit the court to find, if the court might say, because the way it's written now, the only option is for the court to say, okay, bring this up to the criminal division or not. But they want to add, I think the proposal is to add another option that the court could say, well, maybe this case would be appropriate for a youthful offender case. So instead of transferring it directly to the criminal division, we're just going to keep it right in the family division, treat it as a youthful offender. Use the same criteria that you used for suicide. I think that's the idea.
Eric, am I right that only the underlined material on page 3 is the actual proposal?
Correct.
Okay. The rest is criminal.
Exactly.
But
And that's
this-
just there to kind of give a background of the.
Yep.
Does this deal with the other crimes, like the governor's list? I should say the administration list.
It does in the sense that, yes, it addresses them for purposes of ping pong. Exactly. Their list said, let's expand the Big 12.
Right.
But it
We
does.
we will go over that.
Yeah.
As we continue to mark up the bill. But I just want to understanding that this would allow those
Yes, absolutely.
crimes to go up to the criminal division.
Right. Yep, I think it would cover that, everything on that list.
So Erica, do you want to comment on this? Marshall couldn't be with us this morning,
Sure.
and we thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, no problem. Marshall had sent this to me last week, and again, it's, as Eric said, a very rough draft. I think that Marshall identifies, we both agree there's a ping pong problem, but I think this proposal just exacerbates that even a little more. It provides yet another process when we're trying to streamline the process. Now we're adding to it. So I think there's probably still a lot of work to be done on that. So this version, I was not sure that Marshall was going to be providing this to Eric. He had sent it to me last week. So on S4 itself, as to this, the state still would prefer, state's attorneys would still prefer the administration's version, just because of the things that we talked about last week. But what I would say is, even with the most recent version that you were marking up today, and even with those markups, I still think that this bill would be very helpful and would accomplish some of the things that we need to address youthful offender and gun violence in the field. So, the only caveat I would have for that is I would just implore you to put the violation of conditions of release back in. And here's why. Remember the original, the version that the administration had proposed had the violations of conditions of release could be filed directly in criminal court. Here's why that's so important. The family court already doesn't have the case that there are conditions of release on. So the family court, it was either directly filed in criminal court, so it's a Big 12, or the family court's already had a hearing and made the determination that this case should be in criminal court. That's why we have conditions of release. The family court doesn't, they impose conditions of release, but it's not enforceable through a criminal process. So the only VCRs we'd be filing would be VCRs in the criminal court. The criminal court has an inherent interest in enforcing their own violations of conditions of release. So, I mean, if we're talking about that dual process and the ping pong problem, now we're talking about someone who's either been direct filed or has been transferred to criminal court. They have a case there. They have regular court appearances. They have a judge that's familiar with everything. And then they violate their conditions of release, and that's required to be filed in the family court without that change that was initially in. And I'm not sure if that just got removed for a specific reason or which I'd be happy to answer any questions about that, but it just really makes it very difficult when we have someone violate criminal court conditions of release to say, well, now this needs to be filed in the juvenile court.
You work with Eric on the language for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was one, it's like one, it was a one-liner that was part of the administration's. It just makes sense that the violating the criminal court conditions would follow the criminal court case and would go back to the judge that imposed them. Other than that, I think, like I said, even with the changes that were made today, the senator had asked about passing a bad check. We would have, I'm not sure how we would ever charge a passing a bad check while carrying a gun. But I think that the unlawful mischief felony would be the one that you would be concerned about. You know, we had a spate, and Senator Sears probably remembers, of very destructive unlawful mischiefs in downtown Bennington. I'm sure every community has seen it at one point or another. If one of those kids was carrying a firearm at the time, that would have excluded that. If you just remove that instead of looking at it in another way. So, I mean, unless anyone has any questions, I think that there's still some work to be done. You know, the purpose of, I think part of the purpose was we just need to streamline the way this process, the youthful offender process works. And I think that S4 makes some really important changes that will be helpful to practitioners. I think we still need to do a little bit of work on how to make the process itself a little more streamlined and address that ping pong problem. And I think Marshall took a valiant stab at it, but I think we need to do more work. I think just adding more stuff is not going to help.
Thank you. So there's a couple of suggestions there. Violations of conditions of release.
Yeah, that was in the administration proposal. So I
so we
can certainly pull that in.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Are there any other questions for Eric? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a good day.
You too. So why don't we go back to section 8 and then take a break and then come back and continue going over some of the administration proposals as well as other topics. Section 8 is the firearm piece that we left with Senator. I think what I was trying to understand is the definition of a semi-automatic rifle or weapon. Starts on line 17 of page 8.
If I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, that was a definition that was upheld in circuit court?
Yes, that's been upheld in the Second Circuit, which covers Vermont. So constitutionally, again, that was under the pre-Bruin test. But as of now, yes, I think that's, was upheld under a Second Amendment challenge. So it's based on the statute that's both in New York, definition that's embedded in the New York and Connecticut statutes that were affirmed under the pre-Bruin Second Amendment test.
And my understanding is that it may, I think this is the most likely area that could be found unconstitutional under the Bruin decision. But if it's not, if it's banning the purchase, then they'd have to find the federal law unconstitutional too, correct? That bans the purchase of handguns.
I missed that sentence here, so I'm not following that.
Sorry. But I think I started out with this section is the one most likely to come under fire under Vermont decision, U.S. Supreme Court. But the fact they would also have to find the federal statute regarding the purchase of handguns to be unconstitutional as well, I would think.
I think they're different because of the nature of the weapon involved. So, they certainly would be, if the court made a broad statement about age restrictions and said, for example, there are some decisions under Bruin that have looked at that issue, comparing the history, what were age restrictions, if any, with respect to firearms back at the time of the passage of the Second Amendment, or later in the 18th century. If they came down in a broad way, broad restrictions or age restrictions are unconstitutional under Bruin, then yeah, I think the federal prohibition would go down too. But not sure whether that, they might be more targeted to the type of firearm.
Eric, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned that there was a historical analog regarding Section 8.
I didn't say anything about that, no.
I thought you did. Okay, I must have disregarded.
And, just one thing I would want to emphasize, and I think this draft makes it easier to see, because I think Rebecca from the Defender General's office is misunderstanding in a certain way. We currently prohibit under 21 purchase. So that existing statute may come under fire under Bruin, and that's as may be. So what we're doing here is reducing the number of carve-outs to that existing statute. So it's not the first time we've banned under 21 purchase. It's all banned under 21 with these 4 carve-outs. And we're now saying instead of 4 carve-outs for this kind of weapon, there would be 2 carve-outs. So if we're going to be sued successfully over under 21 bans, our existing statute is going out the window anyway. So I don't know if that's persuasive to anybody one way or the other, but what we're doing here is quite limited compared to what we did in S55, which was banning all purchases under 21 of all firearms with the carve-outs.
Yes.
I think, and I don't know how to fix it, but I think my only concern is that sort of gray question area about youth who are hunting. And maybe it isn't a transfer if it's being borrowed, but maybe it is, depends on what the judge would say. And some of the testimony we've heard, and just talking to some of my own family, I don't personally hunt, but my family does, around like those smaller caliber 22 sort of semi-automatic, I think they might be rifles, I don't know, that are often used in recreation. Like like I said, I don't know how to fix it, but I do want to make sure we're not capturing people who are lawful. Perhaps there's a carve out to say that, if it's being used, if you hold a hunting license and it's hunting season, then there's a bit of an exception. I don't know, but I do want to make sure we're not impacting people who are just out hunting.
Well, then we'd be expanding access to them beyond the current law. So then,
Right, like I said, that may not be the answer, I just want to thread that needle so that we're getting at what we're trying to get at, but not impacting that like little piece.
well, in current law, there's no carve out for hunting. You can take a hunter safety course or a firearm safety course, and that's a carve out. But use of semi-automatic weapons or any weapon under 21 for hunting is not covered in the law. So if we were to do that for purchase.
Unless you've taken a hunter safety course, so those folks who've taken that course could use it for hunting, but now we're eliminating that.
Right, but I think what you're talking about is use while you're hunting. This is just for purchase, as here. The other draft, the earlier draft was possession, and that would have criminalized it during hunting. This speaks only to the purchase.
Or transfer.
Or transfer.
And I think my concern is that we, legislative counsel testified that he doesn't see that as a problem, but a judge might see borrowing as transfer.
Yeah.
And so there's some gray area there for me that might be getting, and I don't know how to fix it.
They got to transfer.
Well, and if you do that, then you're allowed.
But she
Yeah,
didn't
and I
know how to fix it, I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that goes further than I want to go.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is, and not shared by everybody, but I think shared by many people, is that hunters don't need semi-automatic weapons against a deer. I know there are plenty of people who would come in and say, I enjoy using my, AR-15 when I deer hunt or whatever. But I think for under 21, what we're saying is we have concerns going back to the brain science. We have concerns about judgment of people in this area. Do we want to arm them with a weapon that is that potentially destructive? And in S55, we said no for all weapons. What this is doing is just reducing the possibility that somebody under 21 takes advantage of one of the couple of carve-outs to get that particular kind of weapon.
I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that 21-year-olds should be hunting deer with AR-15s. What we've heard was there's some small caliber, which is pretty different to me than an AR. I don't know, like I said, I'm not sure, but I don't know. Never mind. But I certainly was not suggesting carve-outs for.
Yeah, well, and we're not voting this bill today, so there's plenty of time for discussion. I suggested this rewrite as preferable to the other one, which would have criminalized anybody under 21 who's in current possession of a weapon. So I do think this is better, but as the discussion points out, maybe we need further discussion.
So I'm always wondering how prove stuff.
What's that?
Well, how do you prove stuff?
Yeah.
So in my house, there is, well, let's say that pistol is considered a semi-automatic assault pistol. And my son uses it. I didn't transfer it to him. It's in the house. He uses my car sometimes without asking, which is fine with me. So is that a transfer? How does, if he's accused, and if he were under 21, he's accused of possessing it, how do you prove that it wasn't his in the first place? That's, really, I would think difficult. So we get hung up on,
I was gonna, responding to the hypothetical of, a kid taking a gun, without your permission or without an express granting of it. I mean, in my opinion, it wouldn't fall under this because, it has to be a voluntary act from you. You have to have the intention of selling it or transferring it to the kid. If you're completely unaware, there's no culpability, in my opinion, that would be on you or any other parents.
And what we're talking about is the state making a clearer statement in terms of these kind of weapons for the under 21 class of user. So, you know, can we prevent every transfer, whether it's official or, you know, the kid taking the weapon? Probably not, but we can clarify that the state feels under 21 shouldn't have this weapon, shouldn't be allowed to purchase this weapon unless they're in law enforcement or the military. So it's a way of making a clearer statement about this particular kind of weapon. And to go back to your example, many of the school shootings that have involved younger people, they have taken their parents' guns, which is why the other body is working on a safe storage provision to speak to that. So I don't think any one piece of statute is going to prevent the problem, but we're trying to be clear and we're trying to act in concert.
This is the only section that I'm concerned about. Make sure we got it right.
Oh, that does trigger my memory, Eric. I know in general, Ledge Council now advises us not to have explicit severability clauses in bills because your sense, as I've understood it, is that it's understood to be severable. If one piece is held to be unconstitutional, the rest can still stand. If that's still the case, or would it help to have an explicit severability provision?
From a legal perspective, I think the view is still that they are severable, whether one says it or not. Whether it provides some comfort level, you know, maybe to explicitly put it in there, that sometimes we'll do that. You know, I can check on whether or not there's a view that severability clauses shouldn't be included because of the general view that pieces of a bill are always severable. But I'm not sure that, honestly, I hadn't heard that there was a policy not to include severability clauses.
I forgot which attorney told me that.
Right.
But
I can
But
try,
I think
I'll follow up
it
on
would
that.
it would make me more comfortable if something was in there and they clear the rest of the bill would not be.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, I'll just say by way of finishing, I think what is proposed here in section 8 is the least, the smallest, most focused action I can imagine on semi-automatic weapons. And that's on purpose because I feel as though consensus doesn't yet exist on, you know, whether or not these guns writ large continue to be sold in great quantities in America. But I do think that people in general are in favor of tightening up what we have in terms of access to them. So this seemed the most targeted change that I could imagine. In fact, the second version, more targeted nonetheless. So with that said, I understand the committee needs to discuss more, and if it's the committee's will that it gets pulled out, then that's the committee's will.
So I just want to chime in just a little bit here. And looking at the section here, and I can assure you, most of the people in my area are opposed to firearms bills. But having said that, we're looking at selling or transferring a firearm with the exceptions of law enforcement, active veteran, or active member of the Vermont National Guard, or whatever else. A 20-year-old is a 20-year-old is a 20-year-old. So he or she wearing a uniform is more than capable of possessing that semi-automatic weapon than my 20-year-old son who's not a police officer, not in the service. Where's the distinction there is what I'm saying.
And I always wondered about the guy who had a DUI. This is an actual case. Could drive a tank or a Humvee in Afghanistan, but couldn't drive a car because he had a DUI in the service.
I mean, I certainly see the point. For me, it raises a different question of whether or not we should have some age restrictions on who joins the military or the police force. But that's a different conversation. I don't disagree. It just points me in a really different direction. That is not doing this.
Yeah, it's amazing how inconsistent we are though, in what we allow under the law. They can't legally drink.
You can add that to the miscellaneous.
Requirements on.
While carrying a semi-automatic
Change
weapon.
Right.
They can't drink.
Or must drink.
I don't know. I think it's time for a break. I think that's a good place to break.